Resourceful Designer, episode 42. It's okay to say no to graphic design work.
Welcome to the Resourceful Designer podcast, offering solutions to streamline your graphic and web design business so you can get back to designing.
And now, your host. He once used Comic Sans on a job on purpose. Mark DeCote.
Welcome to another episode of Resourceful Designer. I am so happy that you've joined me today, that you've plugged me into your ears to listen to me talk about running your graphic design business. Now, I want to share a little secret with you. This is actually the second time I'm recording this episode. I was on vacation last week, but because my daughter is now working and she doesn't have a driver's license yet, which she goes for in just a couple of weeks, but because of her working and my wife having to drive her to and from work, we decided that this year our vacation we were going to spend at home instead of going away somewhere. Plus, we didn't want to ask my daughter to take a week off from work during the summer when she's trying to raise money for university next year. Now, because I was on vacation, I wasn't doing any work. I actually avoided my computer as much as I could. And there was one day during our holiday where my wife was sitting out on the deck in the back reading a book, and I thought, you know what? Why don't I go record this episode, publish it, and get it out there? So at least I would have an episode out last week. So I did just that. I came onto my computer and recorded the episode. Afterwards, when it was time to edit the episode, as I was listening to it, I realized that it almost sounded like I was whispering and I was talking really fast, and I realized that subconsciously I must have felt guilty about doing it because I was on holiday and I told my wife I wouldn't do any work during that week. And you could tell in my audio when I was listening back to it, I could say, wow, it's like it sounds like I'm being sneaky. So I decided then and there not to finish editing the episode. I says, you know what? It's not worth it. Trash that episode and I'll re-record it next week. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm re-recording the episode that I recorded last week. It's kind of like one of those design jobs, you know, the ones where you sit down and you don't have a lot of time, but you start designing something and you do something and you say, there, okay, I've got it done. And then when you come back and look at it afterwards, you realize just how bad a design it was. And it was because you were rushed. You were trying to get it done. You weren't really thinking about it. You weren't using all your creative knowledge. And you end up throwing it out and starting it over again. I don't know if that's ever happened to you, but it has happened to me where sometimes it'll be like late at night where it's like I don't really want to go to bed. So I'll just sit down and I'll design something. And I think, oh, this is great. Oh, I love it. Okay, now I'll go to bed and I'll finish it in the morning. And come morning, I look at it and I go, really? I thought that was good. So that's kind of what happened to me with the podcast last week. Now, of course, if you're listening to these in the future, you're not noticing anything because the episodes are one right after each other. But for you that listens each week as the episodes get published, that's why there wasn't an episode last week. Anyway, before I go any further, I want to remind you that if I do mention any links or if there's anything about this episode you want to refer back to, visit resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 42 for the show notes for this one. Now, I received another great review in iTunes this week from the USA, and this one came in from Going Graphic. It says, great podcast for new designers. Thanks so much for sharing such great and useful information on your podcast. I just found you and I'm listening from the beginning on episode 20 next. Stacy. Well, thank you, Stacy. I appreciate that. Hopefully, once you catch up to the episodes, where this is episode 42, hopefully once you catch up here, you'll hear your review read. And I do appreciate you going back. And I've heard so many people that have discovered the podcast that are doing just that. They went back to the beginning and they're listening to each and every episode. And I'm just floored by that. That's amazing. And I thank you for that. A lot of good information. I make this podcast. I made sure it's evergreen content so that years from now, people can go back and find certain episodes and the information will hopefully be just as pertinent as it was when I recorded it. So thank you for that review, Stacy. And if you would like to leave a review in iTunes, please visit resourcefuldesigner.com/iTunes, and that'll direct you to the Resourceful Designer page on iTunes in your respective country's iTunes store. And then all you have to do is click on the ratings and review tab and write your review right there. Now, as always, I do have a resource of the week, although this one you're probably going to say, Mark, this is a little bit of a cop-out. This isn't really a resource. But what I want to share with you is simply pencil and paper. I don't know if it's just my age and me being really an old school designer, but there's just something about putting pencil to paper in taking down notes, in sketching ideas, in just doodling that really helps me with my creativity. Now, I know there's all sorts of different things you could do with your phone and your tablets, but there's just nothing And I mean nothing that compares to having a pencil and dragging it across a piece of paper, whether you're doodling, and you don't have to be a great artist. I am not a good artist by any means. And yet, I always start off every design with a scrap piece of paper in front of me and a pencil and doodle some ideas out before I start doing them in Photoshop and Illustrator or whatever. And it just helps me to refine or look at ideas. And sometimes it's easier to design something on paper real super quick, really rough, and look at it and go, no, that's not a good idea. And put it aside, where I only spent about 20 or 30 seconds doing it, where if I had brought it into Illustrator and tried the same thing, it might have taken me a few minutes. So I'm actually saving time by using pencil and paper. Not to mention, it's so easy if I'm in one program and I need to copy a color, maybe a CMYK numbers or a hex number, I could just jot it down on paper and then wherever I have that number, wherever I need to go. Or sometimes what I'll do is when I'm looking for a font for a job, I'll open up, I use Suitcase Fusion as my font manager. As I'm scrolling through all the fonts, seeing which ones would be best for the project I'm working on, I'll have a piece of paper and a pencil in front of me and I'll mark down the fonts, because if I'm choosing maybe 20, 30, 40 different fonts that I just want to test, I just want to try them out. When I get back to Illustrator, Photoshop, InDesign, Quark Express, whatever program, I'm not going to remember all of those. So I just jot down the fonts on a sheet of paper and then I can easily go through them, because obviously I'm going to have more than just those fonts. If I choose 10 fonts, when I go into whatever application I'm using, there's more than just 10 fonts there. Sometimes there's 50 or 100 fonts. So to remember which one of those 10s were the ones I wanted to try, I just look down on my sheet of paper. Now, the reason I brought up this topic and I decided to use this as a resource of the week is I was actually in a business a couple of weeks ago. Had nothing to do with work and that. I was just there for some reason. And there was something that they asked me to remember or to get. And I just said, well, could you have a piece of paper and a pencil or a pen or whatever for me to jot this down? And so when I get back home, I'll remember. And they told me that they didn't, that their office was paper free, that several years they had gone paperless and they have no paper at all. And I thought, like, you don't have anything? Not even in your printer? You have a sheet of paper I can take out of the printer? And they said they don't even have printers anymore because everything is digital. And I just thought, like, how can you work like that? I understand the whole environment and going green, but to have absolutely no writing instruments and no paper in the office, I was completely floored by that. Now, of course, I wrote the note down on my phone, which was pretty simple to do. But again, being old school, to me, just picking a piece of paper and a pencil and writing the note down, sticking it in my pocket. When I get home, I know at some point during the day, I'm going to empty my pockets. I'll find that note and remember. So as I said, a little bit of a cop-out this week. It's not really a book or a resource or an app or anything special like that. It's just something that I want you to remember is that there is some sort of magical quality to having a pencil or a pen in that matter and putting it down to paper and feeling the texture as you're writing, as you're drawing, as you're transferring images or information from your brain to the sheet, and that sheet is something you can actually hold. So if you're somebody who does everything on the computer or your tablet or your phone, give it a try. Pull out a pencil and a paper, put it on your desk and see how it helps you. So now, this week's topic is it's okay to say no to graphic design work. Now, I've had a bunch of people ask me this over the years and recently since I started this podcast. And the latest one was Deanna, who sent me a question through my feedback form on the website at resourcefuldesigner.com/feedback. And she sent in this question, and it was supposed to be for the question of the week, but I've been asked this so many times that I decided to devote an entire podcast to it. And Deanna's question was, let's say you know a client is difficult to work with and they have come to you with a job request. How do you not take on that work? Do you tell them you're too busy? Do you refer them elsewhere? And that was her question. And I thought, you know what? Instead of answering this in a question of the week, this one really merited a full podcast episode. Now, as human beings, it's in our nature to try to please whenever we can. For the most part, when somebody comes and asks you to do something, you try to accompany them, whether you want to or not. And that goes for work, for life, for play, all aspect of your life. But the problem with wanting to please everybody is that sometimes it can actually compromise our efforts towards other work. What I mean by that is sometimes you have a limited amount of time. There's only so many hours in the day that you have to work. And if you have a project or a task or something that you need to get done, and then somebody else asks you if you can do something and it's going to take up some of that time, we compromise ourselves sometimes by saying yes. And we work on that task, even if it's just something that'll take a short amount of time. That's time that's taken away from other things that need to be done. And it could affect the quality or the reliability of what we do with that other work. So with that in mind, what we have to learn as graphic designers is that it is okay to say no to a client. If they bring us a job that we can't work on, or maybe we don't want to work on, just say no. And let me share something with you that I learned a long time ago. And that is that no is a complete sentence. No means no. I mean, you see that in commercials all the time in a completely different context that I'm not going to get into. But that applies true to everything. No means no. You don't have to add an apology to it. You don't have to add an excuse to it. But we feel compelled to sometimes when we don't really have to. If you don't want to take on a job for a client, just politely refuse and say you can't. You don't have to tell them why. You don't have to make up stories. You just tell them that you're not able to take on the job. Or if it's a new client, you just tell them that you're not able to take them on as a client. And that's it. End of conversation. No is no. It's a complete sentence. If a new client calls you up and you know something about them and you really don't want to work with them, you don't say, no, I can't, I'm doing this, or I have all this other stuff, I really can't do this. You don't have to give them excuses. You don't have to apologize. Just tell them no. There's another podcaster that I listen to and has nothing to do with graphic design and that, but he has a saying that he brings up quite often, actually. It is something, a mantra that he uses in his life whenever there's something that, a decision that comes up where he has to decide whether or not he's going to do something. And that mantra is, if whatever choice he decides to take, will it cause somebody to puncture him in the face? I know it sounds ridiculous, but he's used this in many situations where he's mentioned it over his podcast, is whenever he's asked to do something, he'll say, like, if somebody asks me to do something and I say no, is that person going to punch me in the face? And if the answer is yes, then do it, because you don't want to get punched in the face. But chances are the answer is going to be no. If you refuse to do something for somebody, that person's not going to punch you in the face. So why worry about it? So I always found that a little bit funny, but it does apply here. I mean, not to that extent. You don't really expect your clients to punch you in the face, but it's the whole analogy of the whole thing where there really isn't going to be any repercussions for turning down the work. Now, I know it's hard to say no when, say, you're just starting off and you're trying to build your business and you need money, or you're going through some rough times, which we all do. I mean, being a home-based graphic designer means you don't have a steady paycheck. So there's ups and downs, peaks and valleys and all of that. So those times where you don't have a lot of money coming in, but bills are still piling up, it's really hard to say no to that. And I mean, if it really comes down to it and you don't want to work on a job, but you're going to be foreclosed on, or you've got past due notices and you really do need the money, bite down and do the job. I'm not telling you to say no and compromise your lifestyle and all that just because you don't want to do the work. But before you do take on the work, just be aware of what is being asked of you and be aware of everything involved before you commit to it. As I mentioned earlier, we have to know how accepting the work will impact our other work, our other tasks, our family life. If whatever job you're being asked to take on, whatever client you're being asked to take on, if taking that on will impact negatively the rest of your work, the rest of your daily life, your family, then the wise thing to do is just simply say no. There's no reason for you to hurt yourself in any other way just to raise some money that's needed. Now, on the flip side, if you look at taking on this client, taking on this project, taking on whatever, and you weigh the pros and cons of it, and you realize that really there's no negative impact on you, then by all means, say yes. But when I'm saying weighing the pros and cons, it's a matter of looking at not just this one task, but in the future. If it's a new client that you're taking on, somebody called you up and they have this project and you're looking at it and you've either heard of this client or just you get that bad vibe, that bad feeling from this client. And you think, well, I'll just do this one job for them because I need the money. Well, that could run into problems in the future and all that. So sometimes it's better to just say no up front and not worry about them. I know it's happened to me before where I've had a client where I really didn't feel like we were a good fit, but he had been referred by somebody else. And again, that somebody else who referred him didn't really know them that well. It's just in conversation, somebody said they needed a designer and he said, oh, I know a designer, try this person. So it's not like it was a friend of my other client, but it was a referral. So I kind of felt like I needed to take them on, even though I had this bad feeling about them. And it turned into one of those nightmare scenarios. I designed something and the person, first of all, they said they liked the design, but once they got the invoice with the agreed upon price, we agreed on the price and we signed the contract and all that beforehand. Once they got the invoice, then they started complaining that they didn't think that the design I provided them was really worth that amount. And it took a long time to collect the money. And then we had the job printed, and when the job came back from the printer, then he started asking, he wanted a refund on the design because the printed piece didn't look exactly like what he saw on screen. He said the colors were off. He says, I really like the colors on screen, but when I saw it on paper, and I had explained everything to him up front that what you see on your screen is not necessarily what will show up on paper because your monitor is not calibrated the same, and it's just two completely different mediums. Well, he started asking for discounts and stuff like that. And finally, I just told him, I says, that's it. We're done. I'm not dealing with you anymore. This is too difficult. It's causing me stress and I don't need this anymore. So I told him no for anything else because he had a bunch of other projects. This was like stage 1 of multiple things and we were going to keep going. And after this first stage, that was it. I was out of there. So that was a situation where I felt I had to say yes, even though I didn't feel comfortable with it. I should have looked at the whole thing and just gone with my gut and said, doesn't matter if he was referred by somebody, because I had actually called this other client and said, you referred this person? They said, oh, I don't really know them. I just met them somewhere and they needed a designer, so I gave them your name. Well, at that point, knowing that it wasn't a good friend or anything like that, I should have gone with my gut and just said no to them. But I decided to take it on against my better judgment, and I paid for it stress-wise. I mean, it was tough dealing with him. He kept calling me, he kept emailing me. And finally, after the first stage, he wanted to move on to the next stage, even though we were still arguing about the first stage. And I just said no. He says, we're done this part. He says, you can go find another designer to do the rest. He says, I don't need this headache right now. Now, what happens in a situation like that? Is he going to start bad-mouthing me? Maybe. Probably. Knowing his nature, that particular client, he's probably bad-mouthing me. But you know what? In the long run, that stuff will all die down and I'll be better off for not having worked with him anymore. Now, another thing to think of whenever a client is asking you to do a job is sometimes it's just beyond you, in which case it makes it easier to say no. If a client asks you to do something and it's beyond your capability, you just say no. I was approached by a large corporation to design a website for them. And the website, once they started describing it, I looked at all the specs and they really wanted to work with me because we had done some smaller jobs together. And they knew I was a web designer as well. So they came to me with the specs. And when I looked at the specs, I said, this is way beyond me. I would need to get a whole team together. And even then, there was stuff they were asking that I had no idea. It was way over my head. So I told them no. I told them I couldn't do this. And I guess when I said earlier, don't give excuses or don't say sorry or anything like that. In this case, I did. I kind of just told them it wasn't an excuse. I just gave them a fact. And I says, the specs to this website, this job that you're offering me is way beyond me, so I'm going to have to turn it down. And that was it. No other excuses or anything beyond that it was way beyond what I'm capable of. And I know I could have gotten a team of people together to work on it, but then I would be leading that, and it was beyond what I was comfortable with leading a team because I wouldn't even know how to go about some of the things. So I simply said, thank you very much, and said no, and they found somebody else to do it, and the website turned out great, and we're still doing other work together. There was no harm done to our client relationship by me saying no to that one job. Now, on the flip side, sometimes maybe you can do the job. You're capable of doing the job, but it's just a job you really don't want to do. Again, think of yourself. Don't just think of your client. Your client might need something, but if it doesn't benefit you, then don't bother. When I used to work at the print shop, one of our jobs in the design department was putting together invoices and purchase orders and statements, all those sheets that you get with all those horizontal and vertical lines. Well, somebody had to put those together. And that was one of my jobs. Sometimes I would have really fun creative work to do, but other days I had this really boring stuff where I would do up an invoice for a company, put their logo on the top and then do everything. And back in those days where people were printing stuff out on pre-printed invoices, I had to make sure that every line and every box and every square lined up perfectly to whatever their printer would be printing out. And it was tedious and boring because there's no creativity in that. It's all like just measuring and lining things up. And it was really, really boring. So nowadays, whenever a client I have that I design their business card, I design their website, I design their brochure, and then they'll come to me and say, oh, can you design this invoice or statement for us? I'll just tell them that, no, I don't do that. There's no creativity in that. And not to mention that they shouldn't be paying my prices to do something like that. They pay me my prices because of my creativity, because of my talent, because of my years of experience being a graphic designer. There's no reason for them to pay those prices for me to put horizontal and vertical lines together so that they can write out an invoice for somebody. So that's something that I will always turn down. Now, I say I always turn it down. I always turn down doing the work. There are times where the client really wants me to handle everything. So what I'll do is I'll tell them that I'm not going to do the work. I'll find somebody else to do it. And oftentimes what I'll do is I'll find out what printing company we're going to use to print their stuff. And I'll just get the printing company to do it because most of them have a design department. I know, I used to work in one. And I would send them the work and say, here's what needs to be done. And then they would send me the proof or send the client directly the proof, and that way. Or in some cases, I have farmed out the job to another designer or somebody that's just starting out, that's looking for the money and that isn't willing to say no to this sort of work. But if it's something that doesn't help my creativity, and it's definitely not something I'm going to put in a portfolio, then say no to it. And if need be, refer them somewhere else. Or, as I said, you can get the job done yourself. I remember a couple of years ago, actually it was 2014, I had a client that I'd been doing a bunch of stuff, and they had this huge charity ball that they had done, this big black tie event. And in it, they had I guess you could call it a red carpet thing, and they took pictures of all the guests, all the attendees. And it wasn't until afterwards, and there was, I forget how many 100 photos that they had. And they were going to be putting these out on a board with all the people, like some sort of promotional piece. And it wasn't noticed till afterwards when somebody started putting this stuff together or organizing it, that in the background of where the photo was taken on this red carpet, there was a banner, and the banner was something about, here's all the charities or here's all the things that we helped in 2013. So it was promoting to the people that were there in 2014, here's everything that we did in 2013. But the problem is when they had the photos taken, the banner in the background, all you saw was the big 2013 next to the people. And they said, well, now it makes it look like all these people were having their photo taken in 2013 instead of 14. So what they asked me to do is to just go in with Photoshop and remove the 2013. So I tried it out in Photoshop. I opened up the file, used the rubber stamp tool, grabbed the sample from nearby, and just cloned out the 2013. It looked great. Saved the file and closed it, and I was done in about 30 seconds, probably even faster. But the problem is there were several hundred photos to do this to, and I really, really didn't want to. So I told the client that I wasn't going to do it, but I was going to handle it for them. And what I did is I actually contacted a local school, design college, and I got one of the students there to do it. So I gave my client a quote on per image. This is how much it's going to cost you per photo to touch up. They agreed on that. And then I turned around and I offered to pay a student just a little bit less than that. So I made a little cut on it, but I didn't have to touch the job. I let somebody else do it. So that's a case where I kind of took the job on, but I said no, that I wasn't going to do it. And my client knew darn well what I was doing. I told them that I didn't want to do this. It was just boring and there was no reason for me to do this. So I was going to get a college student to do it. And they were all for that. So I know that one doesn't really apply, but just to let you know that there's some times where you can take on the work, but don't actually do it yourself because it doesn't help you. And again, time-wise, I was probably several hours of work that I could have easily done and made all the money for it, but I really didn't want to. And that was several hours that I could spend doing other work that helped me out better, that I could have used in a portfolio, that helped improve my creativity, where cloning out a 2013 on several hundred photos really didn't do anything for that. Now, I've talked a lot about turning down work and stuff, but I want to talk about existing clients here. And I know it's much, much harder to say no to an existing client. For one thing, you have that fear that if you say no to them, they might go somewhere else and then you lose all their work. Maybe it's just that one project you don't want to work on, or maybe you can't work on it, or there's some reason where you can't take it on. Well, of course, you're afraid that if they find another designer to do that one, then they might bring all their work to that other designer. Now, there always is that possibility, but those clients, the ones that would do that, are clients that would find an excuse to leave you anyway. So they're not the really good clients. I've talked about building relationships with clients before. I think that was back in episode 20, where if you build that relationship, then they will come back to you regardless. So if you're worried about the client leaving you because you don't do one particular job, then you haven't done a good enough job building that relationship with them to the point where they're going to say, okay, I'll take this elsewhere, but I'll be back because we have a relationship, we have a connection, and I don't want to lose you as a graphic designer. That's the way you want your clients to think. So you have to build that relationship to the point where you can tell them, no, I'm not going to do this job, but I've got no problem doing the next one that you bring in. So if an existing client, and you've built that relationship, comes to you with something that you don't want to do, like I said, that client that had all those photos, or a client that wants me to design an invoice or a statement for them, I'll just say no. That's not something I want to do. Now, one thing I want to touch on here is when you are saying no. I mentioned earlier that no is a complete sentence. You don't need to give an excuse or you don't need to apologize when you're saying no. But I also want to touch here that you should never lie to a client when you are saying no. Never tell them that, oh, I can't do that job because I'm too busy, or I can't do that job because I'm going to be out of town. If you can't do the job, just tell them you can't do the job. Because the thing is if you try to make up a lie, which in most cases that means an excuse, it can backfire on you. And I know it happened to me. When I first started my business, there was this client that I really didn't want to work with. And they had this event, this thing that they wanted done. And they said they needed it done by a certain day. And so I said, well, I really don't want to work with this client. So I'll just tell them, it's like, I can't do it. I know you have this deadline. Well, there's no way I can get it done. I'm sorry. I've got all this other work to do. And there's no way I've got other deadlines I'm working with. There's no way I can add your deadline into it. So I'm just not going to be able to do it. Thank you very much. And I thought, oh, great. I told them I couldn't do it. I don't have the time for it. I don't have to worry about this client. But the problem is this client had heard from a bunch of people that you really should get Mark to do this work. Mark's a great designer. You really should hire Mark to do this work. Well, that client had heard so much about how they should be working with me that they were willing to change their deadline in order for me to do the work. So they came back to me and said, well, you said you had all these other deadlines and you couldn't meet our deadline. Well, here, we're going to give you an extra 2 months to get it done. And at that point, what do you say? I can't give them another excuse saying, well, I have deadlines then as well. I drew a line in the sand and says, I can't do the work because of this. And that client was willing to cross that line. And I've seen this happen time and again. Like that time, the story I'm telling you right now was a situation where I didn't want to work with the client and it backfired on me because the client was willing to wait whatever it took for me to do the job. And I eventually did do the job and it turned out fine. The client wasn't that bad to work with and not as bad as I thought he would be. We did have some problems, but we got over it and it was just one job and I never really heard from the client afterwards. I'd see him around and we'd say hi and that sort of thing. But he never got me to do anything afterwards because it was just a one-time thing he needed done. But I have seen this time and again where people are willing to wait for your services. Whenever I do websites, especially when I was coding websites, now with WordPress, it's not as bad, but when I was hand coding my websites, I had a policy where I never worked on more than 2 websites at a time because it would just get confusing. You're trying to remember code from this, and that's just the way I work. So I never had more than 2 websites on the go. So when a client would come up to me and say, I need a website design, I would tell them, I says, listen, I have a policy. I only work on 2 websites at a time. Both of them are going right now. The earliest I would be able to even look at your job would be a month from now or 2 months from now, depending on what websites I was currently working on. And it wasn't that I was turning down the clients. I was telling them that, no, I can't work on your job right now. And as I said, more often than not, the client was willing to wait. They had heard enough good things about me. They had been referred to me. They had looked around, shopped around, and they really wanted me to do the work. And some clients would say, that's fine. I'm willing to wait. And I remember at one point when I was really busy doing these websites 2 at a time, and I had a waiting list. And I told clients, there's a waiting list. I'm working on 2 now. There's already like 2 or 3 people that are waiting for me. So it's a possibility that I won't be able to start your website for 6 months, depending on how these other ones go. And the clients were fine with that. Now, this was going back 8-9 years ago where much fewer people doing it. Nowadays, I don't know if a client, if I told a client that they would have to wait 6 months before I could even start their website, I don't know if they're going to be willing now. But I also don't hold on to my 2 website policy anymore because I'm not hand coding websites like I used to. Now, remember that if you are doing something like that, telling the client that you're too busy, that's not telling the client no. That's just telling the client you're too busy right now. And that would be a situation where you're willing to do the work. It's not that you don't want to do the work. You're willing to do the work. It's just you can't right now. So that's not the same thing as telling the client, no, you don't want to do the work. So I've been talking a lot about how it's okay to say no. There's situations where, again, if it's going to affect you, your family, if it's going to affect your health because you're going to have to stay up all night to get a job done, or if it's going to affect your other work, if it's going to compromise what you're doing for your other clients in order to take on this new client, it's okay to say no. And I also talked about how saying no is a complete sentence. You don't have to give an excuse. You don't have to say sorry. But you can't just say no to a client. I mean, what I said earlier is all fun and true. But if a client asks you to do a job, you can't just say nope and walk away. So you have to find a more cordial way to say it. So when it comes time, you say something like, thank you for considering me, but I'll pass on this job. Or in some cases, you may say something like, thank you for considering me, but I'm not taking on any new clients right now. And if you want to try to justify that and say something like, try me again in 6 months and we'll see if the situation has changed, and you're kind of hoping that this person will go find somebody else, you haven't really turned them down. They're not going to think negatively of you. And in fact, by telling somebody that you're not taking any new clients right now, that you're too busy, and again, don't just say, well, I'm too busy, so I can't take the work. Just say, I'm too busy, I'm not taking any new clients right now. You know what that actually does? That creates a buzz where if you just say no to a client, they might go away and start telling people, it's like, oh, this person turned me down. I don't like them, and you shouldn't really deal with these people. Like, they had no reason they turned me down. But if you turn somebody down and say that you're too busy right now, you're not taking on any new clients. Like, if you just say you're too busy, then they're going to go, well, but if you say, I'm not taking on any new clients right now, so you're not just alienating them, you're letting them know that you're not taking any new clients. And maybe this is true and maybe it's not true. I said earlier, don't lie to your clients, but if you just tell them that, what this does is this creates a buzz. Then they start spreading the word. It's like, this guy must be really good. He's so busy. He's not taking any new clients right now. He must be a really good designer, as opposed to him or her going around telling people, oh, this person didn't want to deal with me. They said no, they turned me down. Now it's turned around to, wow, this person must be really impressive. And you know what? They might come back in 6 months. And then it's up to you to decide at that point if, okay, they stuck around, they came back, they seem like they really want to work with me. Maybe I can deal with them. Let's see how things go. Or at that point, you can say, sorry, thanks again for coming back, but I'm still not taking on any new clients. Try me in another 6 months. And if that's the case, you can just keep giving that excuse over and over, and this person will eventually go away, but you're not actually hurting anybody's feelings. You're not burning any bridges. And the fact of the matter is even if you tell somebody you're not taking on any new clients, and then right after telling them that, your phone rings or you get an email for something else, there's no reason why you can't take on that job. It's your business. You can do what you want. Is it being deceitful? Yeah, probably. But you're doing it in a positive way. You're giving the person hope, and you're protecting your business in a way that they're not going to go badmouth you. And as I said, if they're willing to wait 6 months and then come back to you to see if you can now take on their work, then maybe this is somebody that you want to start a relationship with. If they're willing to wait for you, give them a try. Now, in some situations, if it's a job that you really don't want to do, as I said, doing statements or repetitive tasks like touching up a photo in Photoshop. So it's not necessarily the client itself you don't want to deal with, but the actual job itself, the project. Then by all means, refer them to somebody else. If you have a list of people that you can refer them to, like in some cases, I'll refer them. If it's just a simple form or something like that, I'll refer them to whatever printer. Are you going to use such and such a printer to do your work? Well, then use the design department at that printer and refer them in that way. But in most cases, if the reason you don't want to take on the work is because of the client itself, do you really want to refer them to somebody else and have this person eventually turn to you and say, why did you refer that person to me? They were really pain and I hated dealing with them. Thanks a lot. So in those situations, if somebody says, well, if you can't work on it, can you refer anybody else? I would just say, well, I don't know anybody or I'm not sure who would be able to work on that. Just tell them that you can't refer them or you don't have anybody to refer them to. And the same goes for existing clients. Sometimes they'll come up with a project that they want you to do and you really don't want to do it. And you just say no, let them worry about finding somebody else. It's not your job to find them a new designer to work on their project if you're not willing to do it. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's our human nature. We want to please everybody. I hate turning down work myself, but sometimes we just have to do it. Sometimes it's for the benefit of our work, the benefit of our health, the benefit of our family, the benefit of our sanity. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just say no. Now, a few other situations where you should really say no, but it's not necessarily turning down work, is when somebody starts haggling with your prices. Stick to your guns. Never, ever adjust your prices because of somebody complaining about them. If somebody finds your prices too high, they can go find somebody else that'll do it for cheaper. Because what always happens in this situation, if you offer a price and somebody says they can't do it for that price, can you do it cheaper? And if you concede and do it cheaper, they have you. They know that, oh, you wanted to charge this price, but you're willing to do it for this price. So now every single job, everything they ever get you to do, they're going to ask for a discount or they're going to say, well, you can do it for this price. So you're best to just say, no, this is my price. These are my rates. You just take it or leave it. Think about it this way. If you walk into a restaurant and you really wanted to have a steak and you look at the menu and they have a beautiful steak there, it's $28. And the waiter comes up to you to take your order and you say, yeah, I really like this steak, but can I get it for $14? I think $28 is a little bit much for this steak. What do you think they're going to tell you? No, you can't have that steak for $14. That steak is $28. If you don't like it, find something cheaper on the menu, or if you want a cheaper steak, go somewhere else. The same with auto repair. You need your brakes done, you go to the mechanic tells you, well, this is how much it's going to cost you, and say, well, I really don't think a brake job should cost that much. Can you do it for this? They're going to say no. This is the price. If you want it done, if you don't want it done here, go find somebody else. Maybe they'll do it cheaper. Your business should be no different. You have your prices, you have your rates. That's what you charge. If the client isn't willing to pay them or thinks they're too expensive, then let the client go find somebody else to do it at a price that they can find acceptable. And never, never, ever fall for the, well, if you give us a discount here, we'll give you more work in the future. Never do anything. Never compromise your business on a promise of future work. It never, ever works out. Now, I get it all the time. Somebody will say, I'm on the board for this such and such an organization. Can you do this work for us? Do it pro bono or do it at a discount. And I also work for this other company. We'll bring you some work. Well, you know what? There's no guarantee that they're going to do that after you do the work. And if that company is already established, they already have somebody doing their work for them. What's going to make you think that they're going to switch to you just because you did something for some other organization that they're associated with? It never works out that way. So never haggle, never compromise your prices for any reason for somebody who asks for it. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't offer discounts or even do stuff for free, but it should be you doing it or you offering it. There's many times where I've offered a discount to somebody or I've done work for free, but it was me offering it to them. I've never, ever done it when somebody has approached me and asked for it, because that tells me that they don't value my work. Whereas if I offer it to them, if they come in and they're willing to pay and they want me to do something and then I offer a discount or I offer it for free, they value my work. In fact, they value my work even more than if they came in asking me for a discount or asking me to do it for free. Now, speaking of offering discounts, I'm going to broach a little touchy subject here, and that's when you're designing for family and friends. Now, I know the topic of this podcast is it's okay to say no, and that applies to family and friends as well. There is nothing wrong with telling your brother, telling your aunt, telling your friend, telling some parent from one of the other kids on your child's sport team, no, you can't do the work. Now, if you want to get by this, what I do in my business, here's how I work family and friends. I have a special price. I have a special discount that I have in place. And if family or friends want something done, I will do it at a discount. Now, I actually have 2 discounts that I should mention here. And that is, if it's something personal for family or friends, I will offer a certain discount. If it's a family or friend that's running a business, they should be willing to pay business prices. Now, in those cases, I do offer them a discount because they are a family member or they are a friend, but it's not as big a discount. My brother-in-law runs a business and I do all his work for him. And I do give him a discount, but it's just a discount on my regular rates. I figure out exactly how much I would charge any other client for the work. And then I offer him a certain percentage off that. And that's what we said at the beginning. And that's what I do. They are running a business and so am I. And by doing that, they feel that they're getting a deal. They're getting a special price because I am offering them a discount, but they realize that I'm running a business just like they are. And by doing it this way, you know that you're not offending them and you're also not losing money. If you're offering the discount, you're not offering 70 or 80% off. I offer a small discount to family and friends that are running a business. Now, as I said earlier, if it's personal, then you can have a little bit more leeway. If great Aunt Agnes contacts you because Uncle Harold is retiring and she wants you to design the invitation for his secret retirement party, well, I'm not going to turn around and charge great Aunt Agnes for that job. I'll gladly do that for free. So there are certain situations where it's more personal and you can do stuff, but also don't be afraid to turn to great Aunt Agnes and say, I'd love to do it, but I can't. It's okay to say no to family, especially to the personal stuff. If they want to take advantage of you, it's like, especially when they say, oh, well, you know what? I need this thing done. Oh, Mark, he'll do this for me. Well, you know what? I might not necessarily do it for you. Depends on how you ask, for one thing. I don't care if you're family or friends. If you just presume that I'm automatically going to do something free for you just because I'm a family or friend, you might be wrong. And you as listener might think, well, wow, he's being really harsh. This is his family. But there's some situations, like when I'm talking family, okay, I designed an entire book for my brother and I didn't charge him a cent. But then there's family like a second cousin, half removed or whatever you call it. If they contact you, I'm not going to give them the same discount that I'm giving my brother. If they want me to do something and I don't feel like doing it, I'll just tell them, no, thank you very much, but there's no benefit to me. I'm not going to do it. And unless I'm super close with that second cousin half removed, I don't have to do the work for them. Especially if, as I said earlier, taking on the work would compromise my family, my health, my other business work. I'm not going to do work for free for a family member if it's compromising work that I would be being paid for and preventing me from meeting deadlines or even just not spending the time I need on a certain project. If it's going to affect me in any of that way, then I'll say no to the work. Doesn't matter if they're friends or family. And the best thing about friends and family, even if you say no, chances are they won't judge you. They won't disown you. And as I said earlier, they're not going to punch you in the face. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is charities and nonprofits. Charities and nonprofits are notorious for asking for stuff. And I want you to keep something in mind. Charities and nonprofits does not mean they don't have money. In fact, a lot of charities and nonprofits have bigger advertising budgets than some corporations and some companies. Now, they keep a lot of that money by getting pro bono work, and that's great. They get people to help them out. But again, if somebody comes to you and says they have this charity or this organization and are you willing to do some work for it, it's okay to say no. If it doesn't impact your business in a positive way, it's okay to say no. And a positive way does not mean you get to include your logo on whatever it is you're designing for them. I know they always say, oh, this is great. You'll get so much publicity. You don't get that much publicity for something like that. I've had my logo on all sorts of stuff over the years, and I don't know of a single time where I've got any business because of it. So even though charities and nonprofits come to you seeming very humble and meek, more often than not, they do have the budget to pay for you. Now, what I normally do whenever they call me up and ask for stuff like that, I always tell them, and this is true, I deal with 2 charities per year. And normally it's the first 2 that'll contact me, and then after that, I don't work with any others. In some cases, it's just charities I choose to work with. This year, there's my local volunteer fire department was having a special event, and they needed some stuff done. So I offered to do something. They didn't ask for a discount. They didn't ask for anything. They just said, here's what we need done. How much will this cost? And I went back to them and I said, listen, you're in my community. I'd like to support you. Here's the price I'm going to charge you for this job. And it was a greatly discounted price. And it's something they weren't expecting. So they were grateful. And I got a lot of good publicity out of that just for helping them out because they spread the word. It's like they didn't come to me looking for a discount. They didn't ask for anything for free. I offered them a discount because I know that those volunteer firefighters put in a lot of time and effort and they aren't really paid or compensated for what they do. And I wanted to help them out. For years, I did work with Habitat for Humanity. I was actually on the board of directors, and that's something. They had actually brought me on to be the public relations and media relations director of the local board for Habitat for Humanity. And I know I was brought on. They asked me if I would join the board because I was a graphic designer. But I told them at the first meeting, just because I'm a graphic designer doesn't mean you're getting your work from me for free. If I have to design work, if you want me to design something, I'm going to charge you for it. Or as the director, I might go hire somebody else. And I did that for a few jobs where I went and hired another designer. I was perfectly capable of doing the work, but I decided it was a conflict of interest or something like that. And I just hired another designer to do it. But even after I left the board, Habitat was still one of the charities that I would do work for. But again, I would charge them. But then throughout the year, if other people would contact me to do stuff, I would tell them, it's like, sorry, I only choose 2 charities per year to help with. If you want, contact me early next year and maybe I'll take on your charity as one of my 2. And one final thing I want to mention about charities, and that is that sometimes, and again, this has to be you offering it and not conceding to something that they're offering, but sometimes you can get a deal with charities. If you want to offer something, like say you really want to help somebody, like I've done this with Habitat for Humanity, where I really wanted to help them out because I believe in their cause. But I was going to be spending quite a few hours doing something, and I really didn't want to do it for free. So we worked up a deal where I would work in exchange for a tax receipt for my time, and that tax receipt would go towards my business, so help reduce my income and all that stuff. But the problem is Habitat for Humanity doesn't give tax receipts for what they call volunteer hours. And if I wasn't charging them for my work, then that's what it was a volunteer time. And they don't give tax receipts for volunteer hours, only for donations. So what I would do is I would give them a quote for the job. Then I would do the work. But then when I invoice them, instead of sending them an invoice through my business, I would send an email from my private account and just say, I've done the work. It costs you this much. Please write out a check to Mark Decote as opposed to my business. And they would send me a check. I would deposit it in my personal account. And then for my business account, I would just donate the exact same amount back to them for my business. And then they would write a receipt for my business. So now my business wrote a tax receipt, or my business made a donation to the charity in that amount. And that tax receipt will help my business out. So that's one little thing that I've done a few times with different charities. If I was offering them some work for free. And again, this is cases where they didn't come asking me for free work, or maybe in the few cases it was, but most of the time it's I was offering to do something free for them. But I would always ask them, is there a way we can do this for a tax receipt? And a few businesses who told me, oh, we can't offer tax receipts for that sort of thing. And when I offered to do it this way, they said, oh, well, yeah, that'll work. We can do that. No problem. So again, but I don't send an invoice through my business. I just send the invoice. Or I don't even send an invoice. I just send an email saying, thanks, I've done the work. Here's how much, please pay me this. So it's not an official invoice or anything like that. Now, that's the way I do it. I don't know how legal or if doing these loopholes, what's involved with that. So please verify with your accountant. I'm not a professional in that sort of sense. So I'm just letting you know a little way. If you do want to do work for a charity for free, it's a way that you can help your business out is by getting a tax receipt for something that will help you out come tax time. So that's my topic for this week. Hopefully it helps you. As I said, I got a lot of questions. A lot of people over the years have asked me this. And since I started the podcast, I've gotten a few people that have asked me this sort of thing. And as I said, this last time, finally, Deanna, her question came in and I said, you know what? It's time for me to answer this one, and it needed a whole episode. So hopefully this gave you some insight. I know it's tough. It's always hard to say no to somebody, but keep in mind, if it's going to affect your health, if it's going to affect your family, if it's going to affect your sanity, and most of all, if it's going to affect anything with your business in a negative way, then just say no. It's not worth taking on the work if it's going to affect you in any of those situations. So obviously, because of this week's episode, I'm not going to have a question of the week. We will bring the questions of the week back for the next episode. Speaking of next episode, next time, I'm going to be talking about creating a don't-do list for your business. You hear so many places talking about creating a to-do list. Well, I'm going to be talking about creating a don't-do list. So if you're curious about that one, tune in to the next episode, number 43. In the meantime, check me out on Facebook at facebook.com/resourcefuldesigner. I'm on Twitter at resourcefuld. And pull out your resource for this week, pencil and paper. And if you're disappointed about that one, and you really wanted something a little bit more tangible or a little bit more helpful towards your business, then get a copy of my free guide at marketingboost.net, or if you're in the US, text Marketing Boost, all one word, to 44222 and download your free guide that'll help you create a better first impressions when clients discover your website and your business. So thank you for joining in, for tuning in, plugging me into your ears this week. I really do appreciate the time you spend listening. I am Mark Decote, wishing you all the best for your graphic design business, and as always, reminding you to stay creative.
Thanks for listening to the Resourceful Designer podcast at resourcefuldesigner.com.